Hi, and welcome to another very exciting tutorial. Today we're going to talk about user notifications in iOS 10, which are pretty amazing and look something like this, with large images, nice and rich, and even the possibility to add custom user interface components to it. So this is a really great topic and very interesting, and let's just have a quick look at the sample application. Here you could add some fruits or some vegetable to your daily history just by clicking on a button right here, but you can also remind yourself and be regularly reminded with notifications, as we just saw, so that we do not forget to get our healthy food intake throughout the day. We are not going to create the complete app in this video, but and we will focus on the user notification stuff. But if you want to know how to build that core data-driven Eat More Vegetable app, then have a look at my new website. There you will find a very detailed written tutorial on exactly that, and a lot more cool stuff like reduced courses. For example, you can get my in-depth core data course at the moment, which is completely updated for Swift 3 for just $30 using the link on my website or the link in the video description below, so definitely check that out. And it would be extremely cool if you guys could tell me if you'd like to see more written tutorials in the future and also what they should cover. So go and have a look at my new website and see some interesting stuff there. And now let's see how we can actually add notifications to the demo app, which you can also download the state without the added notifications at GitHub. Check out the link in the video description below. And then if you've downloaded that, we can get right started. So once you downloaded the project files from GitHub and open the folder, then we have here an Eat More Vegetable Xcode project, which we're going to have a look at in a second. So it actually consists of two major classes, the App Delegate class and the View Controller class, where all of the code necessary for the app to work is already in place. We have also a user interface that is completely ready, except for the Remind Me button, because this button is something that we want to implement now in this tutorial. So let's bring up the assistant editor here and let's add an IB action for that Remind Me button, maybe just below Load Data. So I'm pressing Control on the keyboard and drag to my assistant editor and select an action here. And then let's say this action is called Start Reminding, and hit connect, and then we have our Start Reminding button, which tells our application to remind the user on a regular basis to eat something healthy. So now what do we have to do in order for our notifications to work? First of all, almost everything regarding to the notification magic is going to happen here in App Delegate. So the first thing we need to do to work with the notifications framework is to import user notifications. And if you want to use the custom user interface stuff, then you also need to import user notifications UI. And once we actually imported this framework, we can use the UN User Notification Center. And the first thing we should really need to think about is user authorization, because notifications, just as location services or access to the camera, requires a user to allow the app that it can fire notifications. So we're using the UN User Notification Center and the Current Center to request authorization with some options. And we can, for example, define the options alert or sound or badge. And we actually just need alert and sound. And then we have a completion handler, which allows us to see if we actually have authorization, which I'm going to use an authorized bool for. And we also have an error that we could check, and I'm going to use the authorized bool here and say if not authorized, then I want to print app is useless, because you did not allow notifications. Of course, you shouldn't build that kind of an app that is useless if your user does not allow notifications. But it seems as if I've misspelled something here. So let me just correct this spelling issue and then build that, and then we should be good to go. Let's just quickly run our app in the simulator to see if we get a prompt to let the user accept our app using notifications, and indeed here it is. Eat More Vegetable would like to send you notifications. Notifications may include alerts, sounds, and icon badges. These can be configured in settings. So we allow that for our application right now and right here, and we continue adding some more functionality like the actual notification. And therefore we're adding a new function, which I'm going to call schedule notification. And we're doing that again in app delegate, and we're calling this specific function here later from our view controller. So first of all, you have different options on how you can trigger notifications. Like you could use a time interval, which we are going to do. You could also use date components to trigger a notification on a specific date, but for our purposes we're going to use time intervals. So let's define a trigger right at the top here, and this is going to be a UN time interval notification interval notification trigger, and we can directly initialize that with a time interval. So I could say 5 here, 5 seconds, and I do not want this to repeat. So now that we have our trigger, we can also define the content of our notification. So let's also define a content object. So content is going to be a UN mutable notification content object, which we just have to initialize here. And then we can use that object and, for example, set the title, which I'm going to set to stay healthy. And what we also can do is use the content and define the body. So let's just say here, just a reminder to eat your favorite healthy food. And the last thing that we want to do is to specify a sound, and I'm just using UN notification sound here and the default sound. And now there is something really interesting, namely the actions that we can perform. And therefore there is a category identifier. And it just says here the identifier of the app defined category object, which does not clarify exactly what this actually means. This is a category identifier that we can use to get all of the actions for a specific category that we already defined. If you do not understand that quite yet, then let's have a look at how we can define such a category or how we can use that much more. And we're going to do that in did finish launching with objects, just as we already did with the request authorization. So there are 3 things that we want to do. First of all, we want to define 2 actions. One action to add a piece of fruit and one action to add a piece of vegetable. So these actions need to be defined. Then we want to add these actions to a food category. This is the second step that we want to take. And then at the end, we want to add the category, the food category, to our notification framework. So these are the 3 steps that we want to do right here in did finish launching with objects. And we have, first of all, a fruit action, and we use the UN notification action class to initialize one. And there you can see that we have an identifier, a title, and some options. And first of all, the identifier is going to be add fruit. The title, let's say add a piece of fruit, and we do not need any options here. And then we also have a vegetable object. I will just call that veggie action. And then again, a UN notification action with a identifier. I'm just going to call that add vegetable. And the title, add a piece of vegetable. Again, no options are required here, so I'm just passing along an empty array. And now that we have defined those actions, we can create a new category. So let's say category. And this is going to be a UN notification category. And this again gets an identifier and a list of actions and intent identifiers and so on. So what we really need is the identifier, which is food identifier, or food category, let's call it that way, category. We have two actions that we need to pass along as an array. First of all, we have the fruit action and we have the veggie action. We do not need intent identifiers, so an empty array here, and also we need no options, so again, an empty array. And with that, we have created actions, we have created a category for these actions, and now we can use the UN user notification center and the current center and set the notification categories. And this tells us that this registers your app's notification types and the custom actions that they support. And this is exactly what we want to do, so we pass along our category here as an array. So this is the category, and again, they do serve a distinct purpose. Think of these categories as a group of actions, and once we create a category, you can set a property in the user, in the UN notification content, to add a category to a notification. And all of the actions that we have defined and are contained within that category will then be presented to the user when this specific notification is triggered. And this is exactly the point where we are right now. So we use the content, we use the category identifier, and now all we need to specify here is the food category as a string. And with that, our notification that we're going to define in a second using this content is going to contain those two actions. So now that we have assembled our notification content, we also need to make sure that the image that we want to display in our notification, which is actually also part of the content, that we get that image. And therefore, we need the image path. So we use a guard-let statement here, defining a path object, and then we use bundle main and call path for resource. And since this could go wrong and the resource could not be available, we need to make sure to use such a guard statement here. And I'm going to use the Apple image that we also use for our Apple button right here. But you could, of course, use a much nicer image for your notification. I'm just going to use that. This is going to be scaled up, and you can do something much better than that. So what I need to do here is, first of all, drag that Apple image to my project. I'm just going to do that right there, adding it to my project. And then I have this Apple PNG file here. Actually, nothing fancy. You can do, again, whatever you like, and my image is of type PNG, so I just stated that. And if this does not work, then we simply return and do not create the notification. And then we use the URL and use URL file URL with path and use the path string that we have just created. And then we use a do try statement here. So what we want to try is to create an attachment to our content, or to create an image that we'd like to attach to our notification. And this is something that we should try, because actually something could go wrong and we need to catch the error. So we use the UN notification attachment object here, and we initialize it, for example, with an identifier logo. And you could use your app's logo here. Again, I just used the Apple. And then we pass along the URL that we defined and options that we'd like. But again, we don't need any options here, so I'm passing along nil. And then what we also can do in the dude block here is, using the content object, access the attachments property, which is an array, and pass along our single attachment here that we have just defined. And what we also should make sure of is that we unwrap our URL here, or that we use the correct URL with the lower cases. And then we actually do not need to unwrap anything here. And then we catch a possible error here, which is print the attachment could not be loaded, or something like this. So now we have a trigger that we did not use so far. We have a content object that we provided with a title, with a body, with sound, with a category identifier that contains 2 actions. The category contains 2 actions. We have an image that we have attached to our notification, and now all we need to do is actually firing that notification using the content that we already created. And therefore we need to create a request, which is a UN notification request, and we initialize that with an identifier. I'm going to choose for, let's say, food notification. The content is the content that we have just created. So this is our content object here. And we have the trigger that we also created with a time interval of 5 seconds. And then all we need to do is actually use the UN user notification center, the current center, and then I'm going to remove all the pending notifications or notification requests if there are any. And then I'm using UN user notification center, the current center, and I add a request, which is my request with a completion handler, and there could be an error. So we check if, with an if-let statement, if there is an error, and this is equal to error, and if this exists and we can unwrap this, then we can print the actual error. So using string interpolation here, and we could also use the localized description. And now we build that, and we should be really fine already. So with that, we have a notification, and we can also fire notification, provided we call our schedule notification function. And we can do that going into the view controller and into the function we just defined, which is start reminding. And to access the app delegate, we already have an app delegate object here, which we have initialized with UI application shared and delegate. And this makes things incredibly easy. We can just use the app delegate object and call schedule notification. And now we can run this application in the simulator and see what actually happens. So we're starting the simulator. Nothing actually happens before we do not use the remind me button. And very important, these notifications are not displayed while the app is running. So what I have to do is click remind me and then press Command Shift H to hide our application or to close our application, and there we go. We have our stay healthy notification, and if I drag that down, we have our content attachment, we have our title, we have our body, and we have the 2 actions that we defined. But nothing happens yet once we press on one of those buttons. Nothing is added to our history. So to change that, what we need to do is go back to app delegate and add some more code that will allow us to handle a user action like tapping on the add fruit button. And we're going to do that with a delegate function, which means that we have to adopt a specific protocol, which is the UN user notification center delegate. And this allows us to implement a nice little function that is called user notification center that receive response with completion handler and so on. And the most interesting parameter in this function for us is the response, because the response includes the action identifier that was actually tapped. So we can make a check like if the response and its action identifier is equal to add fruit, we can add a fruit to our database, and else we can add some vegetable to our database. But how can we do that? Well, this is just some core data stuff that you will definitely understand if you have a look at the written tutorial. So I'm creating a food item here. We have a food class, and I'm just using the managed object context here using the persistent container and the view context just to get this view item. And then I'm defining a food item and added property, which I set to NSDate. So this is just for the food item to work properly. We add the current date for the added property. And then for us, interesting is again the food item and its type. And I'm setting that to fruit in that case. And the food item and its type is going to be vegetable here. And then all I need to do is use self and save context to save the data to the database, and then again call the schedule notification function so that once we pressed on add fruit, that in the same time interval, which should not be 5 seconds, it should be some hours, maybe 2 hours or something like that. But once a user tapped on one of the functions or one of the buttons, we want to make sure that another notification is sent in the same time interval. And then also important for this function is to call the completion handler to tell it that we are actually finished working here. So with that done, the last piece of code that we need to add here is to make sure that our delegate function is also getting called. And we're doing that by going back to the schedule notification function using the UN user notification center, the current center, and set the delegate to self. And that means that we can actually have a look at our application one more time and see if we actually get something done in this notification. And if everything works correctly, then I should be able to press remind me here. And we should get a notification in just a few seconds. And here we are with the sound. And I dragged it down and I want to add a piece of fruit. And if I start my application again, I should be able to see that piece of fruit right here in my history. And indeed, that worked. So we have created a cool application that reminds us to eat healthy food. And as you can see, it's really not that hard to implement these user notifications in iOS 10, and they look pretty nice. If you want to know again how to build this complete Eat More fruit and vegetable application, have a look at my website. The link for that is in the video description below. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next week.